Hello and welcome to our Living with Invisible Disabilities series. We're so glad you're here today. We have Lori Junkins with us today, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what living with a TBI is, and we'll talk about what a TBI is as we go along. But thank you, Lori, for being here today.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
So Lori, before we get to learn more about a TBI, we want to know a little bit about Lori. So I'm going to ask you just a few questions. These are quick fun and just give us a sense of who you are.
Okay.
So Lori, dine in or take out?
Dine in.
Bare feet or shoes?
Bare feet.
Great. And summer or winter?
I'll probably surprisingly say winter.
It's usually whichever one I'm not in at the moment.
Well, that's what for me too.
Okay, so here's my favorite question: book or movie?
Oh, I would love to tell you it's book, but it's probably movie.
Gotcha. Okay, there's a little more time for movies in the fast-paced life that we have. Let's talk about traumatic brain injury, or TBI. This is something that I am not very familiar with. So, and I'm sure many of our viewers are not as well. So can you just first explain to us what is a traumatic brain injury or TBI, or what is the proper terminology?
So TBI, I believe, can refer to any type of injury to the brain. In my particular case, it was a brain tumor. So I can't speak to the experience of those who have had a traumatic brain injury as a result of some sort of accident or something like that. But certainly, as you have a brain tumor, if it's one that has to be removed and treated, as mine was, it definitely does create some injury to the brain and involves a recovery process and things of that nature. So,
yeah. So the very word traumatic being in there, especially in your situation, you suddenly find this out. Can you kind of take us back to how this all came to be for you?
Absolutely. So it's been 8 years. I just passed my 8-year anniversary of my craniotomy this weekend.
That's awesome.
So back in 2014, I was having a lot of headaches, but you go to the doctor and say, "Oh, I have headaches." They ask you if you're under any stress. Who's not, right? So I didn't think that much about it, but one day at work, it was really a severe headache. Nothing was helping. And I started hearing my heartbeat. It's called pulsative tinnitus. I have tinnitus anyway, but I was hearing my heartbeat and it was skipping a beat. And that kind of freaked me out. My mom had arrhythmia, heart arrhythmias, and AFib. So I felt like something wasn't right from a cardiology perspective. And I stopped by an urgent care clinic that night, and the nurse practitioner that saw me there basically just said, "Oh, how old are you?" "Oh, it's probably hormone related. Go see an OB/GYN." I woke up the next morning, still had that severe headache. None of the treatment that she had provided gave any relief at all. And I just felt like something's not right. And this does not feel like something I should go to an OB/GYN for. So I went to my primary care physician. And as he went through the questions, what sort of symptoms that I was experiencing and things of that nature, he suggested that I go down the hall and have an MRI of my brain. And he was also going to order a Holter monitor to check out the cardiology part of it. But I remember calling my husband while I waited in radiology and saying, I don't know if I should even do this. It's going to be a lot of money. It's, I have to have this expense. We've got a high deductible. But he said it's worth it. Peace of mind. Go do it. So after actually it was a CT that I had first time around. And so after the technician completed the CT, she asked me to have a seat while she reviewed it to make sure she got everything she needed. And a radiologist actually came out and spoke with me and said, "We see an area of calcification on the brain that looks like it may be a meningioma." are you familiar with that? And I said, yes, my mother actually has a meningioma. It's a benign brain tumor. My mom had had it for years. So I probably wasn't as freaked out about that as most people would be. So I had my appointment with a neurosurgeon. He explained it was a tumor that needed to come out. He wanted to get me on the surgery scheduled that week, but he couldn't tell from the scan what type of tumor it was. And everything when they are going to be operating on your brain. So I scrambled to pull together a will and do whatever things that I thought I needed to do just in case, right? The report came back a week later. It was classified as an ependymoma, which is a very rare type of brain tumor. There are only about 1,300 people per year in the US that are diagnosed with an ependymoma. And in the situation where it's an adult with an ependymoma, it typically is in the spine, not in the brain. When it is in the brain, it's typically in the posterior fossa, the lower part, closer to the brain stem. Mine was actually in the right frontal lobe. And so my surgeon said, in all my years, I've never seen an ependymoma in an adult in the frontal lobe. He's a world-renowned neurosurgeon. He's fantastic. So I thought if he hadn't seen it, I'm going to find somebody who has. And went out to MD Anderson, and they confirmed it was grade 3. So following my surgery, I spent about 7 or 8 weeks out in Houston at MD Anderson receiving radiation treatment. I am, one of the incredibly fortunate and blessed people who have now, 8 years later, very little residual deficits from the tumor and from the treatment. But from the folks in my online support group, who is literally drawing from people all over the world, just hearing the struggles that they have on a daily basis, some with tumors that were benign, but because of its location, either on the spine or the brain stem, they have a lot more residual deficits and late effects of either the tumor or the treatment.
Wow, what a story. So you went from a headache, a severe headache, to a week later, sounds like about a week and a half or so,
yes,
finding out that you had a brain tumor. I can't imagine, first of all, that week or a week and a half, something's there. You just don't know exactly the extent of it. And you did have the experience with your mother. For most people, anything in their brain that shouldn't be there would have been very concerning. So you did have that piece, but at the same time, as you said, you're thinking about making wills and these things. I can't imagine what that experience was like. Say you don't have a lot of lasting effects. Do you have to have regular checkups to ensure that there's nothing still there?
I do. I will have MRIs for the rest of my life.
So that has an emotional consequence, if nothing else. There's always that, will it be back? Will there be additional problems?
Absolutely. They start with a 2-month interval, then 3, 4, and then move to a 6-month interval. So I've been at a 6-month interval for the last several years. And at 10 years, they'll move to an annual scan, as long as I haven't had a recurrence when I reach the 10-year mark. But yeah, particularly in those earlier days when I really didn't know what to expect. I would read clinical studies to try to get an idea about life expectancy. The best clinical study I could find, which there were very few because there were so few people with this type of a tumor, but it indicated that for anaplastic ependymoma, when it's a supratentorial location, that the typical time to the first recurrence is 18 months, and then another 21 months to the second recurrence. And I can't remember the exact statistic on the 5-year life expectancy, but I wasn't sure I would even be around 5 years later. So each scan I would have what we in the brain tumor, and I'm sure other communities as well, refer to as scanxiety. It's a lot of anxiety leading up to that scan, and maybe even a little more while you're waiting on the results. Just because if I've got a scan in 3 weeks, I don't want to make any plans past that mark until I know if the scan is clear. So yeah, lots of anxiety with those scan intervals and just the uncertainty of knowing what could be in the future.
So the reality is, even though you don't have maybe daily physical symptoms, there are ongoing things that are constantly in your mind, or checkups you constantly have to have. So this is never behind you. It's not that you've broken your leg and it heals and you move on. It is always there with you. How much has that support group that you talked about, people that have been through, even though it sounds like each one is very unique, it's still a community that's going through something similar, how much has that meant to you?
It has been a tremendous help. Knowing that there are other people who can relate to what I went through, and just as a source of feedback and information, if I'm having some odd symptoms, like recently I've been having neurological symptoms, some numbness and tingling in my toes and my hands and arms and my ear. And, I could reach out to that community and say, has anybody experienced anything like this? And several said, yes, that's the type of symptoms I was having before they found my tumor. So that type of support network is great. I did have a scan last week and it was all clear. So I don't know what the cause of those symptoms is, but just as you mentioned, when you know that's out there, anytime you're having some, sometimes I'll get a particular type of headache and you just have that wonder and that worry, is it back? Is it back? So that definitely does have implications lifelong.
So not to gloss over the whole thing, that you had brain surgery and radiation and this whole time that was obviously very stressful. There is one thing that you spoke about that I want to make sure make a point of, and that was that you knew that something was not right and you pursued that. You would say to our audience, if someone has experienced something that just doesn't feel right, how would you suggest that they continue to advocate for themselves?
Get a second opinion, get a third opinion, continue pursuing it. If you have that sense that something is not right, keep searching until you can find someone who can give you some answers.
I'm sure this is just one way that your perspective has changed on things since having a brain tumor. What would you say are some other ways, having gone through something so traumatic, as in the name, has shifted your perspective on life in general?
Wow. So I will say this, even before I knew anything about having a brain tumor, I just felt like my life was so great. I'd had such a wonderful life and had been so blessed that if I found out I didn't have another day, I couldn't feel bad about that, because, I've had an amazing, wonderful life. So the diagnosis that I received, I know a lot of people don't feel this way. And I understand that, because for a lot of people, it is a life-changing diagnosis and they never recover and they're in continual pain. But for me, it did give me a totally new perspective and appreciation for every day. And having that opportunity to say, if I only have 2 years or 5 years or 10 years left, what would I want my life to look like? And it does just make you appreciate every single day. And for me, that was a gift. I know that's not true for a lot of people, and I don't want to sound glib about that. I do struggle with some survivor's guilt. Why have I had 8 great years and this 30-year-old guy with 2 young children lost his battle because he was one of those who did have 3 recurrences within 3 years? And that is, it's hard to know why. Well, we can't know why, but that survivor's guilt is something that I do experience.
One assumption that you would like our audience to know that you often encounter that is just not really accurate about brain injuries?
So one is that a brain tumor isn't necessarily a death sentence. A lot of times when people hear that you have a brain tumor, there's an assumption that your lifespan will be very short. And for so many, that's the case. The most frequent type of tumor in adults my age, I'm 58, or will be 58 later this year, it's typically a glioblastoma. And the lifespan for someone with that diagnosis may be 18 months. So a person diagnosed with glioblastoma, they may only have 18 months, 6 months, 2 years. For a person to survive up to 5 years with a glioblastoma is extremely rare. So, one misconception is that it is always universally fatal if you have a brain tumor. While that is generally true for that population of patients, it's not true for everyone.
Last thing we'd like to leave with our audience, do you have any message of hope for someone who may have be in that waiting period that you were, or may have just found out that yes, it is a malignant brain tumor, or they just don't know what's going on? What word of hope would you give for them and their families?
Certainly the fact that there is reason to have hope. There may not be a lot of treatment options, but as you can tell from my situation, it has altered my life in good ways, in many cases. And having that support network through my family, my friends, my faith community, has really been tremendous.
So Lori, if we'd like to learn more about brain injuries and the organizations that you're involved in, how can our audience find out that information?
The website for the National Brain Tumor Society is braintumor.org. For information on the specific type of tumor that I had, which is ependymoma, there's an organization that is now kind of under the umbrella of the NBTS. It's called the Collective Ependymoma Research Network, or CERN for short.
And to learn more about Joshua's Voice, you can go to our website, joshuasvoice.org, and our information will be below for all of our social accounts. Please make sure to like and subscribe to our channel. And thank you, Lori, so much for sharing with us today. I know this is going to be valuable for so many people.
Thank you so much.